A former Navy SEAL walked through the industrial district at midnight, taking his usual shortcut home from his security job. He heard a sound that made him stop dead in his tracks, a desperate whimper coming from behind the old textile warehouse. What he found there would haunt him forever. A Rottweiler chained to a loading dock with barely enough slack to sit down, ribs showing through her coat, and a note nailed to the wooden post beside her. The note said things that made his blood boil. The people who did this thought the dog would die alone in that forgotten place. They were wrong. What happened next will restore your faith in the goodness that still exists in this world. Connor Hayes had been out of the Navy for 3 years. He was 36 years old and working nights as a security supervisor at a shipping facility near the Baltimore docks. The pay was decent and the hours were steady. It wasn't the same as being a SEAL, nothing would ever compare to that, but it was honest work and it kept him busy. Connor had learned that staying busy was the key to not thinking too much about the past, about the missions that still woke him up at night, about the brothers he had lost, about the man he used to be before he decided it was time to come home. The industrial district was quiet at this time of night. Most of the warehouses were abandoned or only used for storage. The businesses that were still operating had closed hours ago. Connor walked these streets 5 nights a week, cutting through the loading areas and alleyways to save himself 15 minutes on his walk home. He knew every corner, every building, every broken streetlight. He had memorized the sounds of this place, the distant hum of traffic from the highway, the occasional rat scurrying through the garbage, the wind whistling through broken windows. But tonight there was a new sound, something that didn't belong. Connor stopped walking and listened. There it was again, a whimper, soft and weak but definitely an animal in distress. He turned toward the sound and found himself facing the old Riverside textile warehouse. The building had been shut down for at least a decade. The windows were boarded up and the walls were covered in faded graffiti. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but sections of it had collapsed years ago. Connor had never had a reason to go back there. There was nothing to see except decay and neglect. But now something was calling out from behind those walls. Connor's training kicked in automatically. He assessed the situation. Unknown sound in an isolated area. Could be a trap, could be someone in trouble, could be nothing. But he had learned in the teams that you never ignored your instincts. If something felt wrong, you investigated. If someone needed help, you helped. That was the code he had lived by for 12 years of service. He wasn't going to abandon it now just because he wore civilian clothes instead of a uniform. He found a gap in the fence and slipped through. The loading area behind the warehouse was even worse than he expected. Broken pallets were scattered everywhere. A rusted dumpster sat in one corner, overflowing with trash that looked like it had been there for months. The concrete was cracked and weeds pushed up through every opening. And there in the shadows near the loading dock, Connor saw her. The Rottweiler was chained to a metal support beam with a heavy chain that gave her maybe 3 feet of movement in any direction. She couldn't even lie down properly. She was sitting in an awkward position, her body tilted to one side, her head hanging low. Connor approached slowly. He spoke in a calm, steady voice, the same voice he had used to talk down armed insurgents in hostile territory. He told the dog he wasn't going to hurt her. He told her he was there to help. The Rottweiler lifted her head and looked at him with eyes that broke something inside Connor's chest. She didn't growl or bark. She didn't show any aggression at all. She just looked at him with an expression that seemed to say she had given up hope a long time ago. As Connor got closer, he could see the full extent of her condition. She was severely underweight. Her ribs stood out like prison bars under her black and tan coat. Her fur was matted with dirt and her own waist. There were sores on her legs where she had been lying on the hard concrete. The chain around her neck was attached to a thick leather collar that had rubbed raw patches into her skin. Some of those patches looked infected. There was no food bowl, no water bowl. Nothing except the chain and the filth and the suffering. Connor knelt down a few feet away from the dog. He needed to see what he was dealing with before he made any moves. That's when he noticed the note. It was nailed to a wooden post that supported part of the loading dock overhang. The paper was yellowed and rain-stained, but the words were still readable. Connor pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. He read the note once, then twice, then a third time because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The note was written in angry, slashing handwriting with a red marker. It said, "This dog attacked my daughter and put her in the hospital. She deserves to suffer and die here. If anyone tries to help her, I will know and you will regret it. I have cameras watching. Touch my property and find out what happens. Connor felt rage flood through his system like jet fuel igniting. Someone had chained this innocent animal here and left her to die a slow death from starvation and dehydration. Someone had written that note to intimidate anyone who might find her. Someone had threatened consequences for showing basic human decency. Connor looked around the loading area for cameras. He didn't see any, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Hidden cameras were cheap and easy to install. The threat might be real. But Connor didn't care. He had faced down enemy combatants armed with automatic weapons. He had defused explosives that could have killed dozens of people. He had jumped out of planes in the dark over hostile territory. He wasn't going to be scared off by some coward who tortured animals and left threatening notes. This dog needed help, and Connor was going to give it to her, cameras or no cameras, consequences or no consequences. He turned his attention back to the Rottweiler. She was watching him with those heartbreaking eyes. Connor spoke to her again, telling her he was going to get her out of here. He moved closer slowly, giving her time to get used to his presence. When he was within arm's reach, he held out his hand palm down for her to sniff. The dog's nose twitched slightly, but she didn't move toward him. Connor waited. Patience was something the Navy had taught him well. After a long moment, the Rottweiler stretched her neck just a bit and sniffed his fingers. Her tail moved. Not a wag, just a slight lift and drop, but it was something. It was a sign that she still had a spark of life left in her. Connor gently touched the top of her head. The dog flinched but didn't pull away. He ran his hand along her neck, feeling the rough edges of the collar, the swollen skin underneath, the heat of infection. He examined the chain. It was thick steel, industrial grade, attached to the collar with a heavy padlock. The other end was wrapped around the metal support beam and secured with another padlock. Whoever had done this had made absolutely sure the dog couldn't escape. They had planned for her to die here. Connor pulled out his phone and took pictures of everything. The dog, the chain, the note, the loading area. He had learned in his intelligence training to document everything. Evidence mattered. If he was going to report this, and he absolutely was going to report this, he needed proof of what he had found. Then he called the only person he knew who might be able to help at this time of night. His buddy from the teams, Keith Rodriguez, answered on the third ring. His voice was groggy with sleep. He asked what was wrong. Connor told him he needed a favor and he needed it now. Keith was awake immediately. He asked what Connor needed. Connor said he needed bolt cutters or a heavy-duty lock pick set and he needed them in the next 20 minutes. Keith didn't ask questions. He just said he would be there. That was the thing about the brotherhood formed in the teams. When one of them called for help, you showed up. No questions asked. No hesitation. Connor sat down on the concrete near the dog while he waited. He kept talking to her in that calm, steady voice. He told her about himself, about growing up in Montana, about joining the Navy right out of high school, about the years he spent as a SEAL and the things he had seen. He told her that he had saved people before and he was going to save her too. The Rottweiler listened. Her eyes stayed fixed on Connor's face. After a while, she shifted her weight and leaned just slightly in his direction. It was such a small gesture, but it meant everything. She was choosing to trust him. Keith showed up 18 minutes later carrying a canvas bag. He was a big guy built like a linebacker with a shaved head and a thick beard. He had been out of the Navy for 5 years, but he still moved like an operator, quick and efficient and always aware of his surroundings. He took one look at the dog and his jaw clenched. He asked who did this. Connor pointed at the note. Keith read it and his expression went dark. He said some things about what he would like to do to the person who wrote that note. Connor agreed completely, but said right now they needed to focus on getting the dog free. Keith pulled a large pair of bolt cutters from his bag. He also had a small first aid kit and a bottle of water. He always came prepared. That was one of the reasons he had been such a good teammate. Keith positioned the bolt cutters around the chain link closest to the collar. He told Connor to keep the dog calm. Connor put his hand on the Rottweiler's head and spoke softly to her. Keith squeezed the handles of the bolt cutters with both hands. His muscles strained. The chain resisted. Keith adjusted his grip and squeezed harder. There was a sharp metallic crack and the chain link snapped. The Rottweiler jerked at the sound, but Connor kept his hand on her head, kept speaking in that soothing voice. The chain fell away from her collar. She was free from the beam, but she still had the heavy collar and a length of chain attached to it. Keith said they could deal with that later. Right now they needed to get her out of here before whoever owned her showed up. Connor agreed. He stood up slowly and the dog struggled to her feet. Her legs shook from weakness. She could barely support her own weight. Keith opened the water bottle and poured some into his cupped hand. The Rottweiler lapped at it desperately. Keith gave her more, letting her drink slowly so she wouldn't make herself sick. Connor took off his jacket and wrapped it gently around the dog. She was shaking from more than just weakness. The night air was cold and she had no body fat left to insulate her. Keith picked up his bag and they started moving toward the gap in the fence. The Rottweiler tried to walk, but her legs gave out after a few steps. Connor didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms. She was a full-grown Rottweiler, but she felt like she weighed nothing. Muscle and bone with no substance. Connor had carried wounded teammates who weighed more. He held her against his chest and walked quickly toward the street where Keith's truck was parked. They got the dog into the back seat of Keith's extended cab pickup. Connor climbed in beside her while Keith got behind the wheel. Keith asked where they were going. Connor said they needed a vet, but everything would be closed at this hour. Keith nodded and said he knew an emergency animal hospital about 20 minutes away. He had taken his own dog there once after a bad encounter with a porcupine. They would be expensive, but they would help. Connor said money didn't matter. Whatever it cost, he would pay it. This dog was getting medical care tonight. The drive took 23 minutes through mostly empty streets. Connor sat in the back seat with the Rottweiler's head resting on his lap. He could feel her breathing fast and shallow. He could feel her heart beating against his hand. She was so weak, so close to death. Connor wondered how long she had been chained there. Days, weeks. The note had been weathered, which suggested it had been there a while. How many people had walked past that warehouse and heard nothing? How many people had maybe heard something but decided it wasn't their problem? Connor felt sick thinking about it. The emergency animal hospital was a modern building with bright lights and a parking lot that was surprisingly full for 2 in the morning. Keith pulled up to the entrance and Connor carried the Rottweiler through the automatic doors. The waiting room had a handful of people with various pets, a woman with a cat in a carrier, a man holding a small dog wrapped in a towel. They all turned to look when Connor walked in carrying the emaciated Rottweiler. The receptionist behind the desk took one look and immediately picked up the phone. She spoke quickly to someone, then told Connor to bring the dog straight back through the door to the left. A veterinarian met them in the hallway. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and kind but serious eyes. She introduced herself as Dr. Walsh. She led Connor into an examination room where 2 vet techs were already preparing equipment. Connor laid the Rottweiler on the examination table as gently as he could. Dr. Walsh began her assessment immediately. Her hands moved over the dog's body with practiced efficiency. She called out findings to the techs. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, multiple infected wounds, possible organ damage from prolonged starvation. She asked Connor how long the dog had been in this condition. Connor said he didn't know, but he explained where he had found her and showed Dr. Walsh the photos on his phone. Dr. Walsh's expression hardened when she saw the picture of the note. She said this was criminal animal cruelty and they were obligated to report it to animal control. Connor said he would file the report himself, but right now he just needed them to save the dog's life. Dr. Walsh nodded. She told the techs to start an IV line and get blood samples. She said the dog would need to stay for at least several days, maybe longer depending on what the tests showed. She said the cost would likely be several $1,000s. Connor pulled out his credit card without hesitation. He said to do whatever needed to be done. Money was not a factor. Keith stood beside Connor as they watched the veterinary team work. The Rottweiler lay on the table, submitting to all of it with that same defeated patience. She didn't struggle when they inserted the IV. She barely reacted when they drew blood. She just kept her eyes on Connor like he was the only thing anchoring her to this world. Connor reached out and put his hand on her head one more time. He told her she was going to be okay now. He told her she was safe. He told her he would come back to check on her. The Rottweiler's tail moved slightly against the table. That tiny gesture made Connor's throat tight. Dr. Walsh said they needed to get the dog stabilized and that would take a few hours at minimum. She suggested Connor go home and get some rest. She promised to call if there were any changes or concerns. She also said they would need to remove the collar and chain, which would require sedation because of the infected wounds underneath. Connor agreed to all of it. He gave the receptionist all his contact information and paid a deposit on his credit card. Then he and Keith left the hospital and stood in the parking lot under the harsh glow of the security lights. Keith asked Connor what his plan was. Connor said honestly he didn't have one. He had acted on instinct when he found the dog. He hadn't thought past getting her to safety. Keith said someone had left that dog there to die and had threatened anyone who tried to help. That person might be looking for the dog. That person might come looking for whoever took her. Connor said he knew. He said that was why he had documented everything. He would file a police report tomorrow. He would push for animal cruelty charges. Whoever did this was going to face consequences. Keith offered to let Connor crash at his place for the night since it was already almost 3 in the morning. Connor accepted. They drove to Keith's apartment in a complex on the other side of the city. Keith had a spare room with a couch that pulled out into a bed. He set Connor up with blankets and a pillow, then said goodnight and headed to his own room. Connor lay down but didn't sleep. He kept seeing that Rottweiler's eyes, kept thinking about how close she had come to dying alone in that terrible place. He kept wondering what kind of person could do something like that to an innocent animal. Connor's phone rang at 6 in the morning. It was Dr. Walsh. Connor's heart jumped into his throat as he answered. Dr. Walsh's voice was tired but relieved. She said the dog had made it through the night. They had gotten her stabilized and the IV fluids were already making a difference. Her blood work showed liver and kidney stress from malnutrition, but nothing that appeared to be permanent damage. They had removed the collar and cleaned the infected wounds on her neck. The dog was resting comfortably now. Dr. Walsh said Connor could come visit later that morning if he wanted to. Connor said he would be there. Connor didn't go back to sleep. He got up and made coffee in Keith's kitchen. Keith emerged a half-hour later and Connor filled him in on the phone call. Keith said that was good news. He asked if Connor had thought about what would happen next. Connor said he had been thinking about nothing else. The dog would need somewhere to go when she was released from the hospital. She couldn't go back to whoever had abused her. She would end up at animal control and probably in a shelter. With her history and her breed, she might not get adopted. She might be put down. Connor made a decision in that moment. He said he was going to keep the dog. He had a small house with a fenced backyard. He lived alone. He worked nights, which meant he was home during the day. He could give her the care and attention she needed. Keith pointed out that Connor had never had a dog before. Connor said he would figure it out. He had figured out plenty of harder things. Keith smiled and said that was typical SEAL attitude. Connor asked what that meant. Keith said SEALs never saw obstacles, only missions that needed completing. Connor supposed that was accurate. At 9 o'clock, Connor went to the police station. He filed a report about finding the dog and showed the officer on duty all the photos on his phone. The officer looked at the picture of the note and shook his head. He said this was definitely animal cruelty and they would investigate. He asked Connor if he knew who owned the dog. Connor said no. The officer said without a suspect or address, the investigation would be difficult. He took down all the information and gave Connor a case number. He said animal control would be notified and they might want to take custody of the dog. Connor's stomach dropped at that. He asked what would happen if animal control took the dog. The officer was honest. He said she would go into the shelter system. Connor asked if he could adopt her instead. The officer said that would be between Connor and animal control. Connor left the police station feeling frustrated. The bureaucracy was already starting to complicate things. He called Dr. Walsh and explained the situation. She listened carefully and then said she had dealt with animal control many times. She said if Connor was serious about adopting the dog, she could help make that happen. She said the key was to establish that Connor had rescued the dog and was willing to provide appropriate care. If animal control saw that the dog was already in good hands, they were more likely to allow the adoption to proceed. Dr. Walsh said she would call the animal control officer assigned to the case and advocate on Connor's behalf. Connor thanked her with genuine gratitude. At 10 o'clock, Connor visited the hospital to see the Rottweiler. She was resting in a large recovery kennel with soft blankets and a water bowl. She looked better already. Her eyes were brighter. When she saw Connor approaching, her tail started wagging, actually wagging. Connor felt something warm spread through his chest. He asked the vet tech if he could go inside the kennel. The tech said yes, but to be careful because they weren't sure how the dog would react after everything she had been through. Connor opened the kennel door and knelt down. The Rottweiler stood up on shaky legs and walked over to him. She pressed her head against his chest and Connor wrapped his arms around her. She made a sound that was half whine, half groan, like she was releasing months of pain and fear all at once. Connor sat with her for an hour. He talked to her about everything and nothing. He told her about the house she would be living in, about the yard where she could lie in the sun, about how she would never be chained again, about how she would never be hungry or thirsty or alone. The Rottweiler listened and leaned against him and slowly relaxed in a way that suggested she was beginning to believe him. When Connor finally had to leave, the dog watched him go with those same trusting eyes. But this time there was something new in them, a glimmer of hope. Dr. Walsh called Connor that afternoon with good news. She had spoken with the animal control officer handling the case. The officer was grateful that Connor had rescued the dog and was willing to work with him on the adoption. There would be a home visit to make sure Connor's house was appropriate for a large dog. There would be paperwork and fees. But as long as everything checked out, Connor would be approved to adopt the Rottweiler once she was medically cleared. Dr. Walsh said she estimated the dog would need to stay at the hospital for at least 5 more days. Connor said he would be there every day to visit. Connor went to the hospital every morning to sit with the Rottweiler. He watched her get stronger day by day. Her ribs became less prominent as she gained weight. Her coat started to shine. The wounds on her neck healed into pink scars. She became more animated, more responsive. She would wag her tail when Connor arrived. She would play gently with the toys the vet techs brought her. She would rest her head in Connor's lap and sigh contentedly. The staff at the hospital fell in love with her. Everyone commented on what a sweet dog she was, how gentle and patient despite everything she had been through. On the 3rd day, Dr. Walsh told Connor that the dog needed a name. Connor realized he had been calling her the dog or girl, but nothing more specific. He thought about it for a while. He thought about how she had survived something that should have killed her, how she had held on to life when everything was stacked against her, how she had chosen to trust again after being betrayed. Connor decided to name her Phoenix because she had risen from the ashes of her old life into something new. The animal control officer came to inspect Connor's house on day 4. Her name was Officer Tran and she was thorough but fair. She checked the fence in the backyard to make sure it was secure. She asked about Connor's work schedule and his experience with dogs. She reviewed his financial situation to make sure he could afford Phoenix's ongoing care. She asked why he wanted to adopt a Rottweiler with a potentially traumatic past. Connor told her the truth. He said he had found Phoenix dying in a terrible place and he had made a promise to her that she would be safe. He said he intended to keep that promise. Officer Tran studied Connor for a long moment and then nodded. She said she could see he was serious. She approved the adoption on the spot. On day 6, Dr. Walsh called Connor to say Phoenix was ready to go home. Connor took the afternoon off from work and drove to the hospital with Keith. They brought a new collar and leash, a dog bed, food and water bowls, and a bag of the special diet food Dr. Walsh had recommended. When they arrived, Phoenix was waiting in the lobby with one of the vet techs. She saw Connor and her whole body wiggled with excitement. Her tail wagged so hard it made her entire back end sway. Connor knelt down and she rushed to him, licking his face and pressing against him. Keith laughed and said it looked like Phoenix had definitely chosen her person. Dr. Walsh came out to review Phoenix's discharge instructions. She handed Connor multiple bottles of medication, a detailed feeding schedule, and instructions for wound care. She said Phoenix would need follow-up appointments to make sure she continued to improve. She also said Phoenix would benefit from some training to help her adjust to normal life. Dr. Walsh recommended a trainer she knew who specialized in rehabilitation cases. Connor took all the information and thanked Dr. Walsh for everything she had done. Dr. Walsh said Phoenix was a special dog and she was glad Connor had found her. She said she believed Phoenix would do amazing things with her second chance at life. Getting Phoenix into Keith's truck was an adventure. She was still weak and couldn't jump that high. Connor and Keith lifted her gently into the back seat. Phoenix settled down immediately with her head resting on Connor's leg just like that first night. Keith drove to Connor's house while Connor filled out the last of the adoption paperwork. When they pulled into the driveway, Phoenix lifted her head and looked around curiously. This was her new home. Connor opened the door and helped Phoenix out of the truck. Her legs were still a bit shaky, but she was getting stronger every day. She stood in the driveway for a moment, sniffing the air, taking in all the new smells. Connor's house was a small two-bedroom bungalow with wood siding and a porch. It wasn't fancy, but it was well-maintained and comfortable. Connor led Phoenix inside and showed her around, the living room with a couch and TV, the kitchen with tile floors, the bedroom where Connor slept, and the back door that led to the fenced yard. When Connor opened that door, Phoenix stepped outside and just stood there looking at the grass and the trees and the open space. Connor realized she might not have seen a yard in a very long time, maybe ever. She walked slowly into the middle of the lawn and then lay down in a patch of sunlight. She rolled onto her side and stretched out fully for the first time since Connor had found her. She closed her eyes and soaked up the warmth of the sun. Connor watched from the porch and felt his eyes get wet. This was what freedom looked like. Keith helped Connor set up Phoenix's new things. They put the dog bed in the living room near the couch. They filled the water bowl and put it in the kitchen. They opened the bag of food and portioned out the amount Dr. Walsh had recommended. Phoenix came inside when Connor called her and ate slowly, carefully, like she was savoring every bite. When she finished, she drank some water and then walked over to Connor and leaned against his legs. Connor scratched behind her ears and told her welcome home. Keith said he needed to get going, but to call if Connor needed anything. Connor thanked his friend for everything he had done. Keith said that's what brothers did for each other. The first few days with Phoenix were an adjustment for both of them. Connor learned Phoenix's routine and preferences. She liked to sleep near him, either on the dog bed beside the couch or on the floor next to his bed at night. She was nervous about loud noises and would come running to Connor whenever she heard something that startled her. She was gentle and sweet, but also watchful, like she was always waiting for something bad to happen. Connor understood that feeling. He had lived with hypervigilance himself after leaving the teams. The constant awareness, the difficulty relaxing, the sense that danger was always just around the corner. Connor started taking Phoenix for short walks around the neighborhood. At first she was hesitant, pulling back on the leash, unsure about this new experience. But gradually she gained confidence. She started to explore, she sniffed everything. She wagged her tail when they passed other dogs. People stopped to ask about her and Connor told them she was a rescue. He didn't share the whole story because it was too painful to repeat, but he told them she had come from a bad situation and was learning to trust again. People were kind. They complimented Phoenix. They told Connor he was doing a good thing. But not everything was peaceful. 2 weeks after bringing Phoenix home, Connor came back from a late shift to find his mailbox vandalized. Someone had spray-painted the word thief across it in red letters. Connor's instincts went on high alert immediately. He checked his house carefully before going inside. Everything seemed normal. Nothing was broken or disturbed, but the message was clear. Someone knew he had taken Phoenix. Someone was angry about it. Someone was trying to intimidate him. Connor called Keith and told him what happened. Keith came over and they discussed what to do. Keith said Connor needed to report this to the police. Connor agreed and called the non-emergency number. An officer came out, took photos, and added it to the existing case file about Phoenix. The officer said without proof of who did it, there wasn't much they could do except document it. He recommended Connor install security cameras around his property. Connor said he would. The next day, Connor went to a hardware store and bought a complete security camera system. He spent the afternoon installing cameras at the front door, back door, driveway, and one covering the backyard. He connected everything to his phone so he could monitor the feeds remotely. He also changed his routine. He started parking his truck in the garage instead of the driveway. He varied the times he left for work and came home. He made sure all his doors and windows were locked at all times. Phoenix seemed to sense the change in Connor's energy. She stayed closer to him. She was more alert when they were outside. She had good instincts. Connor was grateful for that. 3 days later, the cameras caught something. Connor was at work when his phone buzzed with a motion alert from the front door camera. He pulled up the feed and watched as a man in a hooded sweatshirt walked up his driveway. The man looked directly at the camera, then gave it the middle finger and walked away. Connor rewound the footage and captured a screenshot of the man's face. It wasn't a great image because of the hood, but it was something. Connor forwarded the video to the police officer handling his case. The officer called Connor back within an hour. He said he had run the image through their database and gotten a possible match. The man's name was Derek Novick. He had a record, multiple arrests for assault, domestic violence, and drug possession. One arrest for animal cruelty 6 years ago, but the charges had been dropped. The officer said Novick lived about 2 miles from the warehouse where Connor had found Phoenix. He said this was probably their guy. He said they would bring Novick in for questioning. Connor felt a mix of emotions hearing this. Relief that they had identified a suspect. Anger that this person had multiple offenses and was still on the streets. Fear about what Novick might do next if he felt threatened by the investigation. Connor asked the officer what would happen now. The officer said they would question Novick about the dog and the vandalism. If they could prove he had chained Phoenix and left her to die, he would be charged with felony animal cruelty. If convicted, he could face up to 3 years in prison and significant fines. Connor said he wanted to press charges to the fullest extent of the law. The officer said he understood and would keep Connor updated. That night, Connor sat on his couch with Phoenix lying beside him, her head resting on his lap. He stroked her ears and thought about everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago, he had been walking home from work, just another night, just another routine shift. And then he had heard that whimper. He had made the decision to investigate instead of walking past. That decision had led to this moment. Phoenix sleeping peacefully beside him. A violent criminal being held accountable. A small piece of justice in an often unjust world. The next morning, the officer called again. He said Derek Novick had been arrested. When they brought him in for questioning, he had immediately become hostile and aggressive. He had denied everything at first, but when the officer showed him the video of him flipping off Connor's camera, his story started to fall apart. Then they showed him the photos of Phoenix chained to the warehouse. They showed him the note. Novick had finally admitted that yes, the dog was his. He claimed Phoenix had bitten his girlfriend's daughter, and that's why he had chained her up. He said he was teaching her a lesson. The officer said what Novick didn't know was that they had already contacted the hospital records for every emergency room in the area. There was no record of any child being treated for a dog bite in the time frame Novick claimed. He had lied about Phoenix attacking someone. She had done nothing wrong. The officer said that Novick had actually chained Phoenix up because she had gotten too big and he didn't want to deal with her anymore. He had written that note to make sure no one would help her because he wanted her to suffer. He had wanted her to die slowly as punishment for being inconvenient. Connor listened to all this with his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The officer said Novick was being charged with felony animal cruelty, felony threat, and criminal mischief for the vandalism. His bail was set high because of his record. He was likely looking at prison time. The officer said Connor would probably be called to testify at the trial. Connor said he would absolutely testify. He would tell the court exactly what he had found that night behind the warehouse. He would make sure Phoenix's story was heard. Over the next several weeks, Connor and Phoenix settled into a comfortable routine. Connor worked his night shifts and slept during the morning. Phoenix learned quickly that when Connor went to bed, she should rest too. She would curl up on her bed in Connor's bedroom and sleep until he woke up in the afternoon. Then they would have their time together, walks in the neighborhood, training sessions in the backyard, quiet evenings on the couch watching TV. Phoenix was thriving. She had gained 30 pounds and now looked like a healthy, strong Rottweiler. Her coat was glossy. Her eyes were bright and alert. The scars on her neck had faded to thin white lines that were barely visible under her fur. Connor contacted the dog trainer Dr. Walsh had recommended. Her name was Michelle Park, and she had been working with dogs for 20 years. She came to Connor's house to evaluate Phoenix and was impressed by how well-adjusted she seemed given her history. Michelle said Phoenix was smart and eager to please. She said with consistent training, Phoenix could become a very well-behaved companion, maybe even a therapy dog if Connor was interested in that path. Connor liked that idea. He liked the thought of Phoenix helping other people who were struggling, the way she had helped him. They started training sessions 3 times a week. Michelle taught Connor how to work with Phoenix on basic commands, leash manners, and socialization. Phoenix was a quick learner. She mastered sit, stay, down, and come within the first few weeks. She learned to walk on a loose leash without pulling. She learned to greet other dogs calmly. She was gentle with children when they met any during their walks. Michelle said Phoenix had excellent temperament. She said the story about her biting someone was clearly false. Phoenix showed no signs of aggression or fear-based reactions. 3 months after Connor found Phoenix, the trial date arrived. Connor took the day off work and drove to the courthouse downtown. He had testified in military tribunals before, but this was different. This was personal. He waited in a witness room until he was called. When his name was announced, he walked into the courtroom and took his seat in the witness stand. The prosecutor was a young woman named Sarah Lynn. She asked Connor to tell the court about the night he found Phoenix. Connor told the story from beginning to end. The walk home, the whimper, the warehouse, the chain, the note, the condition Phoenix was in, the rage he felt reading those words. Derek Novick sat at the defense table looking angry and defiant. His lawyer tried to paint Connor as someone who had stolen his client's property. Connor kept his cool. He stated facts. He showed photos. He provided Dr. Walsh's medical report documenting Phoenix's condition. The defense lawyer asked Connor if he had permission to take the dog. Connor said he had every moral right to save a dying animal from criminal abuse. The lawyer said that wasn't what he asked. Connor said he didn't care. He said he would make the same choice again without hesitation. Dr. Walsh testified after Connor. She described Phoenix's medical condition in clinical detail. Severe malnutrition consistent with weeks of starvation, dehydration that had nearly caused organ failure, infected wounds from prolonged confinement. The defense tried to argue that maybe Phoenix had only been chained for a day or two. Dr. Walsh shut that down immediately. She said the medical evidence showed prolonged suffering over an extended period. The judge listened carefully to everything. Officer Tran from Animal Control testified next. She described her investigation and home visit with Connor. She said in her professional opinion, Phoenix had been deliberately tortured. She said she had seen many cases of animal neglect and abuse, but this was one of the worst. She said Connor had saved Phoenix's life and provided her with excellent care. She said Phoenix was now a healthy, happy dog living in a good home. She said that was the best possible outcome for a case like this. The defense presented their case next. They called Novick to the stand. He told his version of events. He claimed Phoenix had bitten a child. He claimed he had only chained her for a few hours to discipline her. He claimed he was planning to feed her and bring her home the next day. He claimed Connor had overreacted. The prosecutor tore his story apart on cross-examination. She pointed out that no child had been treated for a dog bite. She pointed out that the note said Phoenix deserved to suffer and die. She pointed out that Phoenix had no food or water. She asked Novick why he had vandalized Connor's property if he was innocent. Novick had no good answers. He got angry and defensive. The jury could see he was lying. The trial lasted 2 days. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They came back with a guilty verdict on all charges. Derek Novick was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. He was also banned from owning any animals for the rest of his life. When the judge read the sentence, Connor felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Justice had been served. Phoenix would never have to fear this man again. No other animal would suffer at his hands. Connor stood outside the courthouse after the verdict and called Keith to share the news. Keith said he was proud of Connor for following through. He said most people would have just called animal control and walked away, but Connor had taken responsibility. He had saved Phoenix and then he had fought to make sure she got justice. That took courage and commitment. Keith said that was what made Connor a good man and a good SEAL even if he wasn't active duty anymore. Once a SEAL, always a SEAL. So the values didn't retire when you did. Life continued to improve for both Connor and Phoenix. They completed their training program with Michelle, and Phoenix earned her Canine Good Citizen certification. Michelle suggested they look into therapy dog training. She said Phoenix had the perfect temperament for it. She was calm, gentle, and intuitive. She seemed to sense when people were sad or stressed and would go to them offering comfort. Connor thought about it and decided to pursue the certification. He liked the idea of Phoenix helping others. She had been saved, and now she could be part of saving others in a different way. They went through the therapy dog training program together. Phoenix learned to navigate hospitals, nursing homes, and schools without getting distracted or anxious. She learned to approach people gently and accept petting from strangers. She learned to stay calm around medical equipment, wheelchairs, and loud noises. She passed her evaluation on the first try. Connor was so proud of her he bought her a special new collar with her certification tags on it. Phoenix wore it like a badge of honor. Their first official therapy dog visit was to a veterans hospital. Connor had mixed feelings about going back to a VA facility. He had spent so much time in them after leaving the Navy, dealing with his own transition struggles, but he wanted to give back. He wanted to help other veterans who were going through what he had gone through, and he wanted them to meet Phoenix, to hear her story, to understand that it was possible to heal from trauma and build a new life. The veterans they met that day responded to Phoenix immediately. Tough guys who didn't show emotion found themselves petting her and talking to her like she was their own dog. They asked Connor about her and he told them the truth. He told them he had found her chained and dying. He told them she had been abused and left to suffer. He told them she had every reason to hate humans, but she had chosen to trust again. He told them if Phoenix could do that, so could they. The message resonated. Several of the veterans thanked Connor with tears in their eyes. They said meeting Phoenix had given them hope. That was worth more than any medal Connor had ever earned. Connor and Phoenix started visiting the VA hospital every week. They also visited children's hospitals, nursing homes, and schools. Everywhere they went, Phoenix made a difference. Kids who were afraid of dogs would pet her. Elderly patients who hadn't smiled in days would light up when she entered the room. Trauma survivors would open up about their pain while stroking her soft fur. Phoenix had become a healer. The dog who had nearly died alone in a terrible place was now bringing comfort to dozens of people every week. One afternoon, Connor got a call from Officer Tran. She said she was reaching out because she had a situation. There was a dog fighting case that had just been broken up by police. They had rescued 11 dogs from horrific conditions. Most of them were pit bulls who had been trained to fight. They were aggressive and traumatized. Most would probably have to be euthanized because they were too dangerous to rehabilitate. But Officer Tran said there was one dog, a young pit bull female, who seemed different. She was scared but not aggressive. She was shut down but not violent. Officer Tran wondered if Connor might be willing to evaluate her. She said she had seen what Connor did with Phoenix. She wondered if he might be able to help this dog too. Connor said he would come take a look. He didn't promise anything because he had no experience with dog fighting survivors, but he would at least assess the situation. He drove to the animal control facility that afternoon. Officer Tran met him at the door and led him back to the kennels. Most of the dogs from the fighting ring were kept in a separate area because of their aggression issues, but the young pit bull was in a regular kennel by herself. She was white with brown patches, and she was pressed into the back corner of the kennel, shaking. Connor knelt outside the kennel and watched her. She watched him back with terrified eyes. She had fresh wounds on her face and legs. She had scars all over her body. She looked like she weighed maybe 30 pounds when she should have weighed 50. Connor spoke to her softly. He told her he understood. He told her he had met another dog once who had been hurt by bad people. He told her that dog was safe now and happy. He said maybe the same thing could happen for her. The pit bull didn't move, but her ears twitched forward slightly. She was listening. Officer Tran said the dog had been seized from a property where they found fighting rings and dozens of abused animals. Most of the adult dogs were beyond help. They had been so damaged by years of fighting that they couldn't be safely rehomed. But this young female was only about 18 months old. She hadn't been fighting as long. There was a chance she could recover with the right care. Officer Tran said if Connor was willing to foster her temporarily, they would cover her medical expenses and provide support. If she showed progress, Connor could adopt her. If she didn't improve, they would make other arrangements. Connor asked what other arrangements meant. Officer Tran was honest. She said the dog would probably be euthanized. Connor thought about Phoenix sleeping peacefully at home. He thought about how one person's decision to help had changed her entire life. He thought about how saving Phoenix had changed his life too. He looked at the terrified pit bull in the corner of the kennel and made his decision. He told Officer Tran he would foster her. He said he couldn't promise it would work out, but he would try. Officer Tran smiled and said that was all anyone could ask for. They named the pit bull Hope. It seemed appropriate. Connor brought her home that evening. Getting her into the house was a challenge. She was so scared she wouldn't walk on the leash. Connor ended up carrying her inside. He set her down in the living room and she immediately ran and hid behind the couch. Connor let her stay there. He said she could come out when she was ready. Phoenix was curious about the new arrival. She sniffed in Hope's direction and then looked at Connor like she was asking permission. Connor told Phoenix to be gentle. Phoenix approached the couch slowly and lay down on the floor where Hope could see her if she peeked out. For the first 3 days, Hope barely moved from behind the couch. She would come out at night when Connor was asleep to eat and drink and go outside to relieve herself. But the moment Connor woke up, she would disappear behind the couch again. Connor didn't push her. He had learned with Phoenix that healing couldn't be rushed. He kept Hope's food and water bowls full. He talked to her when he walked past. He let Phoenix spend time near the couch so Hope could get used to another dog's presence. On the fourth day, Connor woke up to find Hope lying on Phoenix's bed instead of behind the couch. Phoenix was on the floor next to her. The two dogs were touching, their bodies pressed together. Connor stayed very still and quiet, not wanting to disturb the moment. This was progress. Hope was starting to trust Phoenix. That was the first step. Over the next several weeks, Hope slowly came out of her shell. She started following Phoenix around the house. She started approaching Connor when he sat on the floor. She started eating while Connor was in the room. She started going outside during the day. She even played with a toy one afternoon, tossing it in the air and pouncing on it like a puppy. Connor took video of that moment and sent it to Officer Tran. She replied saying she couldn't believe the transformation. She said Connor was doing something special. Connor didn't feel like he was doing anything special. He was just providing safety and patience. The same things Phoenix had needed, the same things every traumatized creature needed. Time, consistency, proof that the world could be kind. Hope was teaching Connor just as much as he was teaching her. She was showing him that resilience was real, that even the most broken beings could heal if given the chance. 3 months after bringing Hope home, Connor made it official. He adopted her. Officer Tran processed the paperwork with a huge smile on her face. She said Hope was one of the lucky ones. Most dogs from fighting rings didn't get this outcome. Most weren't as fortunate as to find someone like Connor who was willing to put in the work. Connor said he was the lucky one. He had gone from living alone with nothing but his memories and his regrets to sharing his home with two amazing dogs who filled his life with purpose and joy. Connor started bringing Hope to therapy dog training. She was more challenging than Phoenix had been because of her past, but she was also more determined. She worked hard to overcome her fear. Michelle was patient and encouraging. She said Hope had tremendous heart. After 6 months of training, Hope earned her therapy dog certification too. She and Phoenix became a team. They visited hospitals and nursing homes together. People loved seeing the two of them side by side. Phoenix the confident Rottweiler and Hope the gentle pit bull. Both survivors, both thrivers. The story of Connor, Phoenix, and Hope started to spread. A local news station did a feature about them. The story went viral on social media. Connor received hundreds of messages from people who said they were inspired. Some said they had adopted rescue dogs because of the story. Some said they had started volunteering at shelters. Some said they had reported animal abuse they witnessed instead of looking away. Connor was humbled by it all. He hadn't rescued Phoenix and Hope for recognition. He had done it because it was right, because they needed help and he could provide it. But the attention did lead to something unexpected. A woman named Patricia Olson reached out to Connor through social media. She said she ran a nonprofit organization that rescued and rehabilitated abused animals. She said her organization was small and always struggling for funding. She asked if Connor would be willing to speak at their fundraising event. She said hearing Phoenix and Hope's story directly from him would make a powerful impact. Connor was hesitant at first. He wasn't comfortable with public speaking, but Keith encouraged him. He said Connor had a message worth sharing. He said if Connor's story could save more animals and help more people, it was worth being uncomfortable for an hour. Connor agreed to speak at the fundraiser. He was nervous the entire week leading up to it. He practiced what he would say. He looked at photos of Phoenix from the night he found her to remind himself why this mattered. The night of the event, Connor stood on a small stage in front of about 200 people. Phoenix and Hope sat beside him, both wearing their therapy dog vests. Connor took a breath and started talking. He told the audience about walking through that industrial district, about hearing the whimper, about finding Phoenix chained and dying, about the note that had threatened consequences for helping, about making the choice to intervene anyway. Connor told them about Phoenix's recovery, about her transformation from a broken, defeated dog to a confident therapy dog who brought comfort to people every week. He told them about Hope and her journey from fighting ring survivor to gentle companion. He told them that every animal deserved a chance, that every life had value. That one person's decision to care could change everything. When Connor finished speaking, the audience stood and applauded. Several people were crying. Patricia told Connor afterward that the organization had raised more money that night than they had in the previous 2 years combined. She said his words had moved people to action. Connor felt good about that. If his experience could help other animals get the care they needed, then all the hard parts had been worth it. 5 years after finding Phoenix behind that warehouse, Connor's life looked completely different from the one he had been living. He had left his security job and now worked full-time for Patricia's animal rescue organization. His military training made him excellent at coordinating rescue operations and managing logistics. He could stay calm in crisis situations. He could assess threats quickly. He could make hard decisions when necessary. The skills that had made him a good SEAL made him a good rescuer. Phoenix and Hope were both healthy and happy. They spent their days at the rescue facility with Connor greeting visitors and comforting the animals who arrived scared and traumatized. They spent their evenings at home, relaxing in the yard or curled up on the couch with Connor. They had become minor celebrities in their community. Children recognized them on walks. People stopped to take photos, but to Connor, they were just his girls, his family. The two souls who had taught him that saving someone else was the best way to save yourself. Connor still thought about that night in the alley sometimes, about hearing that whimper, about making the decision to investigate instead of walking past. Everything in his life now stemmed from that single choice. If he had kept walking, Phoenix would have died, Hope would have been euthanized, Connor would still be working nights and coming home to an empty house and wondering what his purpose was. But he hadn't kept walking, he had stopped, he had looked, he had acted, and that had made all the difference. The warehouse where Connor had found Phoenix was eventually torn down. A new building went up in its place, some kind of tech startup office. Connor drove past it sometimes on his way to rescue calls. He would look at that spot and remember what had been there. The chains, the filth, the note, the dog who had been left to die. And then he would look in his rearview mirror at Phoenix and Hope riding in the back seat of his truck, both of them happy and healthy and loved. He would smile and think about how far they had all come. Connor had learned something important through all of this. He had learned that heroism wasn't just about combat missions and medals. It was about showing up when someone needed help. It was about doing the right thing even when it was hard or scary or inconvenient. It was about refusing to look away from suffering. He had been a Navy SEAL for 12 years and had done things most people couldn't imagine. But the thing he was most proud of in his entire life was finding Phoenix behind that warehouse and choosing to save her. People sometimes asked Connor if he ever worried about what might have happened if he had tried to help Phoenix and Derek Novick had followed through on his threats. If Connor had been hurt or worse. Connor's answer was always the same. He said some things were worth the risk. He said Phoenix had been worth the risk. Hope had been worth the risk. Every animal they had saved through the rescue organization had been worth the risk. Connor had spent years running toward danger in service of his country. Now he ran toward danger in service of innocent creatures who couldn't save themselves. The mission had changed, but the core purpose remained the same. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Stand up against cruelty. Be willing to sacrifice for something greater than yourself. On the anniversary of finding Phoenix, Connor took both dogs to the park. They played fetch and ran through the grass and rolled in the sunshine. They were so full of life and energy and joy, no one watching them would ever guess the horrors they had survived. Connor sat on a bench and watched them play and felt grateful. Grateful that he had found them. Grateful that he could give them good lives. Grateful that they had given him purpose and meaning when he desperately needed both. As the sun started to set, Connor called the dogs over. They came running, tongues lolling, tails wagging. Connor knelt down and wrapped his arms around both of them. He told them he loved them. He told them they were the best dogs in the world. He told them thank you for saving his life just as surely as he had saved theirs. Phoenix licked his face. Hope pressed against his chest. And in that moment, Connor knew with absolute certainty that everything he had been through, all the pain and struggle and loss, had led him exactly where he was supposed to be. The story of a former SEAL who found a dog chained behind a warehouse with a note might sound simple, but it was never simple. It was about courage and compassion. It was about choosing to act instead of turning away. It was about second chances and new beginnings. It was about finding family in unexpected places. It was about learning that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. Connor had walked through that industrial district looking for a shortcut home. What he found instead was his purpose, his calling, his reason for being, and it all started with refusing to ignore a desperate whimper in the dark. If this story moves you, don't just close this page and forget about it. Do something. Volunteer at an animal shelter, foster a rescue animal, donate to organizations that save abused and neglected creatures. Report animal cruelty when you see it. Be the person who stops and helps instead of walking past. Be the Connor that some phoenix is waiting for. And if you're struggling yourself, if you feel lost or broken or purposeless, remember that your moment might be just around the corner. The soul you're meant to save might be waiting for you to hear their cry for help. Stay alert. Stay compassionate. Stay willing to act. Your purpose might find you in the most unexpected place. Just like Phoenix found Connor in a dark alley on an ordinary night that turned out to be extraordinary. God puts people and animals in our path for a reason. Connor believed that now. He believed he was meant to find Phoenix. He believed they were meant to save each other. He believed their story was meant to inspire others to look for opportunities to make a difference in their own communities. Every act of kindness matters. Every decision to help instead of hurt changes the world just a little bit. And sometimes one person's courage can start a ripple effect that touches hundreds or thousands of lives. Connor, Phoenix, and Hope continue their work today. They're still rescuing animals. They're still visiting hospitals and bringing comfort to people who need it. They're still proving every single day that love can overcome trauma, that broken things can be made whole, that second chances are real and beautiful and worth fighting for. This is their story, but it could be anyone's story. It could be your story. All you have to do is listen for the whimper in the dark. All you have to do is choose to help. All you have to do is refuse to walk away. That's where miracles begin. That's where unbelievable things happen. That's where broken souls become whole again. Amens.